The fluorescent lights in courtroom 3B buzzed overhead like angry wasps as I sat in the wooden chair that felt more like an electric chair. My hands trembled as I clutched the tissue that had long since turned into a soggy mess. Around me, the sound of muffled laughter cut through the air like broken glass, each chuckle feeling like another nail in the coffin of my dignity. "Look at her," someone whispered behind me, not even trying to be quiet. "She looks like she hasn't slept in weeks." They weren't wrong. I hadn't slept properly in months, not since my entire world had been turned upside down and shaken until everything good fell out. The dark circles under my eyes told the story of countless nights spent staring at the ceiling, wondering how I'd gotten here, how the woman who used to have everything had become this broken shell sitting in a divorce court. But it was the perfume that nearly broke me completely. Natasha Collins sat 3 rows behind me, her perfectly manicured fingers drumming against her designer purse with the rhythm of someone who knew she'd already won. She wore a red dress that probably cost more than my rent for 3 months, and her blonde hair was styled in loose waves that caught the courtroom's harsh light just right. But it wasn't her beauty or her expensive clothes that made my stomach twist into painful knots. It was my perfume she was wearing. The same vanilla and jasmine scent I'd worn on my wedding day 10 years ago. The same perfume Benjamin used to say reminded him of summer evenings and promises that would last forever. The same fragrance I dabbed behind my ears every morning for a decade, believing it was part of what made me special to him. She'd chosen it deliberately, I knew with absolute certainty. This wasn't an accident or some cosmic coincidence. This was a calculated message, loud and clear. She had taken everything that used to be mine, right down to the scent that had once made my husband lean in close and whisper that he loved me. Elena Martinez looks absolutely pathetic, Margaret Martinez announced to anyone within earshot, her voice carrying across the courtroom like a foghorn, designed specifically to ensure I heard every poisonous word. I always told Benjamin, she wasn't good enough for our family. Look at her now, completely finished. The word finished hit me like a physical blow to the chest. Margaret had been saying it for weeks, ever since the divorce proceedings began, dropping it into conversations like a curse she was determined to make come true. Finished. Done. Over. Used up. Worthless. A woman past her expiration date, who had somehow fooled her precious son into marrying her, but whose time was finally up. Maybe she was right. Maybe I really was finished. I glanced around the courtroom and saw nothing but hostile faces staring back at me. Benjamin's business partners sat in a neat row like a jury that had already reached their verdict, all wearing expensive suits and expressions of disgust when they looked in my direction. His golf buddies whispered among themselves, probably sharing stories about what a terrible wife I'd been, how I'd let myself go, how Benjamin deserved so much better. Even the court reporter seemed to be typing with more force than necessary, as if my very presence in this room annoyed her. Benjamin himself sat at the plaintiff's table looking like he'd stepped straight out of a business magazine. His dark hair was perfectly styled without a strand out of place, his navy suit was pressed to crisp perfection, and his smile was the same charming one that had made me fall head over heels in love with him back in college. Except now that smile felt like a knife twisting slowly in my chest, a reminder of everything I'd lost and everything I'd never really had. His lawyer, a sharp-faced woman named Patricia Hawthorne, shuffled through papers with the confidence of someone who'd never lost a case and had no intention of starting now. She'd made it crystal clear from day one that she considered me nothing more than a gold digger trying to steal money from a hard-working, successful man. The fact that I'd worked from home as a graphic designer for 8 years, contributing to our household income while raising our son and managing our home, seemed to mean absolutely nothing to anyone in this room. "Your Honor," Patricia was saying, her voice crisp and professional as she addressed Judge Reynolds, "my client has been more than generous in his settlement offer. Mrs. Martinez will receive spousal support for 2 years, which is frankly more than she deserves, given her failure to maintain the household properly and her recent documented instability." Instability. Another word they loved to throw around like confetti at a parade. Because apparently, having panic attacks when your husband of 10 years announces he's leaving you for his secretary makes you mentally unstable. Because crying when you discover your entire life has been a lie somehow proves you're unfit to be a mother. I looked down at the settlement papers spread out in front of me like evidence of my own failure. 2 years of spousal support that wouldn't even cover rent in a decent neighborhood. No claim to the house we'd built together, the one where I'd painted every room and planted every flower in the garden. No share in Benjamin's thriving real estate business that I'd helped him start by designing all his marketing materials for free during those early, struggling years. And worst of all, joint custody of Lucas with Benjamin having primary placement, which meant I'd see my own son every other weekend like some kind of stranger who'd been granted visiting privileges. My 9-year-old son sat in the gallery behind me, his dark eyes serious and watchful in a way that made him seem much older than his years. He'd insisted on coming today, even though I'd tried desperately to protect him from this ugliness, to shield him from seeing his mother humiliated in front of a room full of people who seemed to take genuine pleasure in my downfall. "Mom," he'd said this morning while I was getting dressed in my only good suit, the one I'd bought for job interviews that never seemed to lead anywhere. "Are you going to let them win?" The question had caught me completely off guard. It's not about winning or losing, sweetheart. Sometimes grown-ups just can't live together anymore, and they need judges to help them figure out what's fair. But Lucas had given me a look that was far too knowing for his years, too perceptive for a child who should have been worried about homework and video games instead of his parents' divorce. Dad's lying about something big. I can tell when people lie. Kids say things like that, I'd told myself at the time. They don't understand the complexities of adult relationships, the way marriages can slowly crumble under the weight of unspoken resentments and growing apart. But now, sitting in this courtroom surrounded by people who seemed to take genuine pleasure in my humiliation, I found myself wondering if my 9-year-old son had seen something that I'd been too blind, too trusting, too naive to notice. Judge Patricia Reynolds sat behind her massive wooden desk like a queen on her throne, her gray hair pulled back in a severe bun and her reading glasses perched on the end of her nose. She'd been reviewing the case files for what felt like hours, occasionally glancing up at the circus, surrounding her with obvious distaste for the whole proceeding. "Mrs. Martinez," she said finally, her voice cutting through the courtroom chatter like a blade. "Do you accept the terms of this settlement as presented by opposing counsel?" This was it. The moment of truth where I either found some hidden reserve of strength to fight back or accepted complete and total defeat. I looked at the papers again, at the pathetic amount of money they were offering me, at the custody arrangement that would mean seeing my son every other weekend, like some kind of distant relative who'd been granted visiting privileges. Behind me, I could hear Natasha's soft, satisfied laughter mixing with Margaret's triumphant murmur. Finally, Margaret was saying to someone, "We can put this whole unpleasant mess behind us and move on with our lives." I opened my mouth to speak, to accept the settlement that would leave me with almost nothing, when I heard the soft sound of sneakers on the polished courtroom floor. Lucas had stood up. My heart stopped beating as I watched my 9-year-old son walk purposefully toward the judge's bench, his small backpack slung over one shoulder and his face wearing an expression of determination that reminded me so much of my own father when he'd made up his mind about something important. "Excuse me, Your Honor," Lucas said in his clear young voice that somehow managed to carry across the entire silent courtroom. Judge Reynolds looked surprised but not annoyed by the interruption. "Yes, young man?" The entire courtroom had gone dead silent. Benjamin was half standing at his table, his face confused and slightly alarmed. Margaret Martinez looked like she'd swallowed something extremely sour. Even Natasha had stopped her subtle preening to stare at my son with obvious confusion. Lucas reached into his backpack and pulled out a small flash drive. It was bright blue with a cartoon character on it, the kind of thing a kid might use for school projects or storing video games. But the way he held it, like it contained something precious and vitally important, made my breath catch in my throat. He walked right up to the judge's bench with the confidence of someone 3 times his age and held out the flash drive. "I think you really need to see this," he said quietly, but loud enough for everyone in the courtroom to hear. Judge Reynolds took the flash drive, turning it over in her hands with obvious curiosity. "What is this, son?" Lucas leaned closer and whispered something in her ear that I couldn't hear. I watched the judge's eyebrows rise slowly as she listened, her expression shifting from mild interest to sharp, focused attention, and then to something that looked almost like satisfaction. She looked at Lucas for a long moment, then at the flash drive, then directly at Benjamin's table where the confident smiles were starting to fade into confusion and something that might have been fear. Judge Reynolds inserted the flash drive into her computer and spent several tense minutes clicking through whatever was stored on it. The courtroom remained absolutely silent, except for the soft sounds of her mouse clicking and the occasional sharp intake of breath from someone in the gallery. Finally, she looked up. Her eyes swept across the courtroom, taking in Benjamin's increasingly pale face, Margaret's confused frown, and Natasha's nervous fidgeting. When her gaze finally landed on me, I saw something I hadn't expected and hadn't dared to hope for. Respect. Judge Reynolds smiled then, just slightly, but it was the first genuine smile I'd seen in this courtroom all day. She looked directly at Benjamin and his high-powered legal team, and her voice carried a note of satisfaction that made my heart skip a beat. "Well," she said, her words falling into the silence like stones into perfectly still water, "let's just say, the truth has finally arrived. 6 months earlier, I was living in what I thought was a fairy tale. The morning sun streamed through the kitchen windows of our beautiful colonial house on Maple Street, casting golden rectangles across the hardwood floors that Benjamin and I had picked out together during our 3rd year of marriage. I hummed softly while making pancakes, the same vanilla and jasmine perfume I wore every day, mixing with the smell of coffee and maple syrup to create what I foolishly believed was the scent of happiness. "Something smells amazing in here," Benjamin said as he walked into the kitchen, already dressed in one of his perfectly tailored suits. He wrapped his arms around my waist from behind and kissed the spot just below my ear, the same spot he'd been kissing for 10 years. My beautiful wife, making breakfast for her grateful husband. I leaned back against his chest, feeling the solid warmth of him, breathing in his familiar cologne. "Lucas has a field trip today, remember? I wanted to make sure he had a good breakfast before the bus comes. What would I do without you?" he murmured, and I felt that familiar flutter in my stomach that he could still cause after all these years. "You take such good care of us." Lucas bounded into the kitchen, wearing his favorite dinosaur t-shirt and jeans with grass stains on the knees. At 9 years old, he was all energy and curiosity, with Benjamin's dark hair and my stubborn streak. "Dad, are you coming to my soccer game on Saturday?" "Wouldn't miss it, buddy," Benjamin said, ruffling Lucas's hair. "Your old man will be cheering the loudest from the sidelines." This was our routine, our perfect little family morning. Benjamin would kiss us both goodbye, promise to be home for dinner, and drive off in his silver BMW to his real estate office downtown. I would walk Lucas to the bus stop, wave until the yellow bus disappeared around the corner, then come home to work on my graphic design projects in the converted bedroom that served as my office. I had clients who depended on me for their marketing materials, small businesses that couldn't afford big advertising agencies. The work was steady and fulfilling, and it allowed me to be home when Lucas got off the school bus every afternoon. Benjamin always said he was proud of my independence, my creativity, the way I could balance motherhood and career without missing a beat. "You're amazing," he would tell me during those quiet evening moments after Lucas had gone to bed. "I don't know how you do it all." Our house was everything we dreamed of when we were young and broke and planning our future together. 4 bedrooms, 2.5 baths, a big backyard where Lucas could play and I could garden. The mortgage was manageable because Benjamin's business was thriving, and we'd even started talking about taking a family vacation to Europe the following summer. I spent my days designing logos and brochures, picking Lucas up from school, helping with homework, and preparing dinners that we'd eat together as a family. Benjamin would tell us about his day, about the houses he was selling, and the clients he was working with. His real estate company had grown from just him working out of our spare bedroom to a team of 6 agents with a prime downtown location. "I'm thinking about expanding again," he told me one evening in early fall while we cleaned up after dinner. "Maybe opening a second location across town." "That's wonderful," I said, genuinely excited for him. "You've worked so hard for this." He smiled and pulled me close. "We've worked hard for this. I couldn't have done any of it without your support." But looking back now, I realize that was when the small changes started. Changes so subtle that I dismissed them as the natural stress of a growing business. Benjamin began working later, coming home after Lucas and I had already eaten dinner. "Sorry, honey," he would say, looking genuinely apologetic. "The Peterson deal is more complicated than I thought. I grabbed something at the office." His phone started ringing at odd hours, calls he would take in his study with the door closed. When I asked about them, he would wave his hand dismissively. "Just clients. You know how demanding some of these buyers can be." The flowers started appearing around that time too. Beautiful bouquets that he would bring home randomly, not for any special occasion. "Just because I love you," he would say, and I would feel guilty for even noticing that he'd never done that before in 10 years of marriage. "Dad's been bringing you a lot of flowers lately," Lucas observed one afternoon while we arranged the latest bouquet in a vase. "Is it because he feels bad about working so much?" The question caught me off guard. "What makes you say that, sweetheart?" Lucas shrugged, but his dark eyes were thoughtful. Tommy's dad brought his mom flowers every day for a week before he told her he was moving out. "Dad's not moving out," I said quickly, perhaps too quickly. "He's just busy with work. The flowers are because he loves us." But Lucas's words planted a seed of unease that I tried desperately to ignore. Children see things differently, I told myself. They don't understand the complexities of adult relationships or the pressures of running a successful business. The weekend trip started in November. "I need to check out some properties upstate," Benjamin would say. "Potential investment opportunities. I'll be back Sunday evening." He would pack a small overnight bag and kiss me goodbye, promising to call when he got to his hotel. Sometimes he did call, brief conversations where he sounded distracted and tired. Sometimes he didn't, and when I asked about it later, he would apologize and say he'd fallen asleep early after a long day of driving around looking at properties. I trusted him completely. Why wouldn't I? This was Benjamin. The man who had proposed to me on the beach where we'd had our first date, who had held my hand through 12 hours of labor when Lucas was born, who still left little love notes in my coffee mug some mornings. But Lucas was watching everything with those sharp, observant eyes of his. He started asking questions that made me uncomfortable. "Why does Dad's car smell different when he comes home from his trips?" "What do you mean, different?" "Like perfume. But not your perfume." I laughed it off, explained that he probably met with female real estate agents or clients who wore strong perfume. But the seed of doubt that Lucas had planted was starting to grow, sending out tiny roots of suspicion that I fought against with everything I had. Because this was my life, my perfect, beautiful life with my loving husband and my wonderful son in our dream house on Maple Street, and I wasn't ready to believe that any of it might be built on lies. The earring was small and silver, shaped like a teardrop with a tiny diamond at the center. I found it on Benjamin's side of our bed, nestled between the pillows like a secret that had finally decided to reveal itself. For a moment, I just stared at it, my brain refusing to process what I was seeing. It wasn't mine. I knew every piece of jewelry I owned, and this delicate, expensive-looking earring had never belonged to me. My hands shook as I picked it up, feeling the weight of it. The reality of what it meant settling over me like a heavy blanket I couldn't throw off. "Benjamin!" I called out, my voice sounding strange and hollow in our bedroom. "Can you come here for a minute?" He appeared in the doorway, still wearing his work clothes, his tie loosened around his neck. "What's up, honey? I was just about to jump in the shower." I held out the earring, watching his face carefully. "I found this in our bed. Do you know whose it is?" The change in his expression was so subtle that I almost missed it. A tiny flicker of something, guilt, fear, resignation, that passed across his features before his face went completely blank. "I have no idea," he said, but his voice lacked the confusion I would have expected. "Maybe it fell out of your jewelry box?" "It's not mine, Benjamin. I've never seen this earring before in my life." We stood there in silence for what felt like hours, the small piece of jewelry sitting in my palm like evidence in a courtroom. I waited for him to offer some explanation, some innocent reason why another woman's earring would be in our marital bed. I waited for him to seem surprised, concerned, eager to solve this mystery with me. Instead, he sighed deeply and sat down on the edge of the bed, his shoulders sagging in a way that told me everything I needed to know before he even opened his mouth. "Elena," he said quietly, We need to talk. The words hit me like a physical blow. No, I whispered, backing away from him. No, we don't need to talk. You need to explain why there's another woman's earring in our bed. It's Natasha's, he said, and the casual way he said her name, like it was something I should already know, made my knees weak. Natasha Collins from my office. I knew Natasha. I'd met her at company parties, a beautiful blonde woman who worked in marketing and always seemed to laugh a little too loudly at Benjamin's jokes. She was young, maybe 28, with perfect teeth and the kind of confidence that came from never having been rejected by anything or anyone. What was Natasha doing in our bed? I asked, though I already knew the answer. I just needed to hear him say it. Elena, please sit down. What was she doing in our bed, Benjamin? He looked up at me then, and for the first time in our 10-year marriage, I saw a stranger looking back at me, cold, calculating, completely devoid of the warmth and love I thought I knew so well. We've been seeing each other for about 8 months, he said matter-of-factly, as if he was discussing the weather. I didn't plan for it to happen, but it did. And now I want a divorce. The room started spinning around me. 8 months. While I was making his favorite dinners and doing his laundry and believing we were planning a future together, he had been with her. In our bed. In our home. In our life. 8 months? I managed to whisper. I've been trying to figure out how to tell you. I know this is hard, but Elena, we both know our marriage has been over for a while now. Our marriage has been over? I stared at him in disbelief. Since when? Because yesterday morning you told me you loved me. Last week you brought me flowers. Last month we talked about going to Europe next summer. I was trying to make the transition easier for everyone, especially Lucas, but I can't keep pretending anymore. The word pretending cut through me like a knife. How long had he been pretending? How many of those sweet moments, those loving gestures, those intimate conversations had been nothing but an act? I want you out of the house by the end of the month, he continued, his voice becoming more businesslike with each word. I've already spoken to a lawyer. You'll get spousal support, of course, and we'll work out a custody arrangement for Lucas. You've already spoken to a lawyer? The betrayal kept getting deeper, layer after layer of deception that I was only now beginning to understand. How long have you been planning this? Elena, please don't make this harder than it has to be. Harder than it has to be? I was shouting now, all the shock and hurt and rage pouring out of me at once. You've been cheating on me for 8 months, planning to divorce me behind my back, and you want me to make it easy for you? That's when I heard the soft footsteps in the hallway. Lucas appeared in our bedroom doorway, his face pale and his eyes wide with the kind of fear that children get when their world starts falling apart. Mom, Dad, why are you yelling? Benjamin immediately switched into father mode, his voice becoming gentle and reassuring. Hey, buddy, Mom and I were just having a discussion. Everything's okay. But Lucas wasn't buying it. He looked from Benjamin to me, taking in my tear-stained face and his father's guilty expression, and I could see him putting pieces together in that sharp mind of his. Are you getting divorced? He asked quietly. The question hung in the air like a bomb waiting to explode. Benjamin and I looked at each other, and I realized that this moment would change everything for our son. There would be a before and an after, and we were standing right at the dividing line. We're going to live separately for a while, Benjamin said carefully, but that doesn't change how much we both love you. Lucas nodded slowly, but his eyes never left his father's face. Is it because of the lady who smells like flowers? Benjamin's face went white. What lady, Lucas? The one who was here last Tuesday when Mom went to the grocery store. I saw her car in our driveway when I got off the bus. The silence that followed was deafening. Benjamin stared at our son with something that looked like panic, while I felt the last pieces of my marriage crumbling around me. My 9-year-old son had known before I did. He had been watching, observing, protecting me in the only way he could by keeping track of the lies that were destroying our family. And in that moment, I realized that Lucas wasn't just an innocent victim in this divorce. He was going to be my strongest ally in the battle that was about to begin. The law office of Henderson and Associates smelled like old leather and broken dreams. I sat in an uncomfortable chair across from Thomas Henderson, a tired-looking man in his 60s who specialized in what he called budget divorces. His desk was cluttered with files, and he kept glancing at his watch like he had somewhere more important to be. "Mrs. Martinez," he said, flipping through the papers Benjamin's lawyer had sent over. "I have to be honest with you. This is going to be an uphill battle." "What do you mean?" I asked, though the sinking feeling in my stomach told me I already knew. "Your husband has retained Patricia Hawthorne. She's one of the best divorce attorneys in the state, and she doesn't come cheap. The fact that he can afford her while you're sitting here in my office tells me everything I need to know about the financial disparity in this case." I looked around his cramped office, taking in the water stain on the ceiling and the outdated law books lining the shelves. Thomas Henderson was what I could afford with my dwindling savings account, while Benjamin had hired a shark in designer suits. "But I have rights, don't I? I was married to him for 10 years. I helped build his business." Thomas sighed and removed his glasses, cleaning them slowly. "Of course you have rights, but proving your contributions to his business success will be difficult without documentation. Do you have records of the marketing work you did for his company? Contracts, payment records?" My heart sank. I never charged him for the work. He was my husband. I was helping our family. "That's going to be a problem. Without proof of your financial contributions, it looks like you were simply a housewife who did some hobby work on the side." The word housewife stung, even though there was nothing wrong with being one. But the way he said it, like it was something shameful, made me feel small and worthless. Over the next few weeks, I watched helplessly as Benjamin's legal team systematically dismantled my life. Bank accounts I thought were joint suddenly became his accounts that I had merely been given access to. The house we'd bought together was apparently in his name only, something I'd never bothered to check because I trusted him completely. "Your wife signed a quitclaim deed 3 years ago," Patricia Hawthorne informed my lawyer during our first official meeting. "She relinquished any claim to the marital home." I stared at her in confusion. "I never signed anything like that." She slid a document across the table with my signature clearly visible at the bottom. This was notarized and filed with the county clerk's office. "Perhaps you don't remember, but your signature is quite distinctive." I looked at the signature, and it was definitely mine, but I had no memory of signing any such document. Then it hit me. 3 years ago, Benjamin had brought home a stack of papers related to refinancing the house. He'd pointed to several places where I needed to sign, explaining that it was just paperwork to get a better interest rate. "I was told this was for refinancing," I said weakly. "What you were told is irrelevant," Patricia replied with a cold smile. "What matters is what you signed." The custody evaluation was scheduled for the following week, and I spent days preparing for it, researching the evaluator and practicing answers to potential questions. Dr. Rebecca Walsh had an impressive resume and 20 years of experience in family court cases. "Just be yourself," Thomas advised me. "Show her what a good mother you are." But when I arrived at Dr. Walsh's office, I immediately sensed something was wrong. She was cold and distant, asking pointed questions about my mental health and my ability to provide for Lucas. "I understand you've been experiencing some emotional difficulties since your separation," she said, making notes on her clipboard. "I've had some anxiety, which is normal when your marriage falls apart." I replied carefully. "Have you sought professional help for these issues?" "I've seen a counselor a few times." She made another note. "And what about your living situation? I understand you've had to move out of the family home." The questions felt like traps, each one designed to make me look unstable and unfit. When she asked about my income, I had to admit that several of my graphic design clients had mysteriously canceled their contracts in recent weeks. "Financial instability can be very stressful for children," Dr. Walsh observed, writing furiously. What I didn't know then was that Margaret Martinez had been busy behind the scenes, spreading poison throughout our social circle like a disease. She'd called my clients, expressing concern about my mental state and suggesting they might want to find more reliable designers. She'd spoken to other parents at Lucas's school, painting me as an unstable woman who was having a breakdown. "I heard Elena Martinez is having some kind of nervous breakdown," I overheard one mother saying at the grocery store. "Margaret Martinez is so worried about that poor little boy." The isolation was systematic and brutal. Friends stopped calling. Invitations to social events dried up. Even my own neighbors began treating me like I was contagious, crossing the street to avoid having to speak to me. Meanwhile, Benjamin and Natasha were everywhere together. They attended Lucas's soccer games as a couple, with Natasha cheering from the sidelines like she belonged there. They showed up at the school's fall festival, Benjamin introducing her to other parents as his partner. "She seems lovely," I heard one of the other mothers say, "so much younger and more vibrant than his ex-wife." The worst part was watching Lucas navigate this new reality. He was polite to Natasha but distant, and I could see the confusion and hurt in his eyes when she tried to act motherly toward him. "She's not my mom," he told me one evening after a particularly difficult custody exchange. "She keeps trying to hug me and asking about my homework like she cares. How does that make you feel, sweetheart?" Lucas was quiet for a long moment. "Like everyone thinks she's better than you, but they don't know what I know." "What do you know, Lucas?" He looked at me with those serious dark eyes. "I know she's not who she pretends to be, and neither is Dad." That night, after Lucas had gone to bed, I sat in my tiny apartment kitchen and realized how completely I'd been outmaneuvered. Benjamin had planned this divorce like a military campaign, positioning his pieces months in advance, while I'd been completely unaware that we were even playing a game. But Lucas's words echoed in my mind. He knew something that the adults didn't. And for the first time since this nightmare began, I wondered if my 9-year-old son might be the key to uncovering the truth that everyone else seemed determined to bury. The eviction notice was taped to my apartment door like a scarlet letter, bright yellow paper that might as well have screamed failure to anyone walking by. I stood in the hallway of the rundown complex on the wrong side of town, staring at the words that blurred together through my tears. 30 days to vacate, past due rent, legal action pending. My hands shook as I unlocked the door to the cramped 2-bedroom apartment that had become our home after Benjamin forced us out of the house on Maple Street. The place smelled like the previous tenant's cigarettes and the mold that grew in the bathroom corners, no matter how much bleach I used. The walls were thin enough that I could hear every argument from the neighbors, every crying baby, every late-night television show. This wasn't supposed to be my life. I dropped my purse on the second-hand kitchen table and looked around at our meager belongings. The furniture was a mix of garage sale finds and pieces I'd managed to salvage before Benjamin changed the locks on our old house. Lucas's drawings were taped to the refrigerator, bright crayon pictures of dinosaurs and spaceships that seemed to mock the gray reality of our situation. The phone rang, and I answered it with the desperate hope that it might be good news for once. "Elena, this is Patricia Hawthorne," came the crisp voice of Benjamin's lawyer. "I'm calling to inform you that my client will be seeking full custody of Lucas, effective immediately." The words hit me like a physical blow. "What? Why?" "We have evidence of your continued mental instability and your inability to provide a stable home environment for the child. The eviction notice, your job losses, the reports from other parents about your erratic behavior, it all paints a very concerning picture." "What reports? What erratic behavior?" "Mrs. Martinez, I think it would be in everyone's best interest if you simply agreed to supervised visitation. Fighting this will only make things more difficult for your son." The line went dead, leaving me standing in my kitchen with the phone pressed to my ear and my world crashing down around me once again. They were going to take Lucas away from me. My son, the only good thing left in my life, was going to be ripped away because I couldn't afford a decent apartment or keep my clients from abandoning me. I sank into one of the mismatched chairs and put my head in my hands. The panic attack started slowly, like it always did, with a tightness in my chest that gradually spread until I couldn't breathe properly. My heart raced, my palms grew sweaty, and the room started spinning around me. This was what they meant by mental instability. These attacks that had started after Benjamin's betrayal, when my body decided that breathing was optional and my mind convinced itself that I was dying. The attacks that had gotten worse as the divorce proceedings dragged on, as I lost client after client, as I watched my life disintegrate piece by piece. "Mom?" Lucas's voice cut through the panic, and I looked up to see him standing in the doorway with his backpack still on his shoulders. He'd walked home from the bus stop by himself, something that would have horrified me 6 months ago, but had become routine in our new reality. "Hey, sweetheart," I managed, trying to wipe the tears from my face before he noticed them. But Lucas noticed everything. He dropped his backpack and came over to me, his small hand resting on my shoulder with a gentleness that broke my heart. "Are you having one of your scared feelings again?" That's what he called my panic attacks, scared feelings. As if reducing them to child-friendly terms could somehow make them less devastating, less proof of my unfitness as a mother. "I'm okay," I lied. "Just tired." Lucas studied my face with those dark eyes that saw too much. "Dad called me today." "He did? What did he say?" "He wants me to come live with him and Natasha full-time. He said you're too sick to take care of me properly." The words were like knives twisting in my chest. "What did you tell him?" "I told him I wanted to stay with you." Lucas climbed into my lap, something he rarely did anymore since he decided he was too old for such things. "But Mom, I think they're going to make me go anyway." I held him close, breathing in the scent of his shampoo and the lingering smell of school cafeteria food on his clothes. "I won't let that happen, Lucas. I promise." "How can you stop them? They have more money and better lawyers, and everyone believes them instead of you." The matter-of-fact way he said it, like he was discussing a math problem instead of the destruction of our family, made me realize how much this divorce had aged my little boy. He shouldn't have to understand legal strategies and custody battles. He should be worried about homework and friends, and whether he'd make the soccer team next year. "I don't know how yet," I admitted. "But I'll figure something out." Lucas was quiet for a moment, and I could feel him thinking, processing information in that sharp mind of his. "Mom, what if I told you I knew something that could help?" "What kind of something?" He pulled back to look at me, his expression serious and determined. "Something about Dad and Natasha, something they don't know I know." "Lucas, what are you talking about?" "I've been watching them, and listening, and I found out some things that I don't think they want anyone else to know." A chill ran down my spine. "Sweetheart, you shouldn't be spying on your father." "I'm not spying," he said with the indignation of a child who'd been accused of something unfair. "I'm investigating, like a detective, and I think Dad is doing something really bad." "What kind of bad?" Lucas glanced around the apartment as if checking for hidden microphones, then leaned closer to whisper in my ear. "I think he's stealing money. And I think Natasha is helping him." I stared at my 9-year-old son, this little boy who still believed in Santa Claus and the Tooth Fairy, and tried to process what he was telling me. "Lucas, that's a very serious accusation." "I know. That's why I've been collecting evidence." "Evidence?" He nodded solemnly. "I have pictures and recordings and documents. I've been saving everything on my computer, and I made copies on a flash drive in case something happens to my computer." "Lucas, where did you learn to do all this?" "YouTube," he said matter-of-factly. "You can learn anything on YouTube if you know what to search for." I looked at my son, really looked at him, and saw something I'd missed before. While I'd been falling apart, while I'd been drowning in panic attacks and legal bills, and the overwhelming weight of my collapsing life, Lucas had been quietly conducting his own investigation into the people who were destroying our family. "Show me," I said. Lucas smiled for the first time in weeks, and for a moment he looked like the carefree little boy he used to be. "I was hoping you'd say that." As he ran to get his laptop, I felt something I hadn't experienced in months. Hope. Maybe my 9-year-old son had found the weapon we needed to fight back. Maybe the truth really could set us free. Maybe we weren't as powerless as everyone wanted us to believe. Lucas's laptop sat open on our kitchen table, like a portal to a secret world I never knew existed. My 9-year-old son moved the cursor with the confidence of someone 3 times his age, clicking through folders with names like evidence, audio files, and financial documents that made my head spin. "I started recording things about 2 months ago," Lucas explained, his voice matter-of-fact as he opened the first folder. "At first it was just because Dad was acting weird, and I wanted to figure out what was wrong. But then I realized he wasn't just acting weird, he was lying about everything." The first file he opened was a photograph, taken from what looked like a hiding spot behind some bushes. It showed Benjamin and Natasha standing outside a bank, but they weren't alone. A man in an expensive suit was handing Benjamin a thick envelope, and all 3 of them were smiling like they'd just won the lottery. "Who's that man?" I asked, leaning closer to the screen. "His name is Robert Chen. He's one of Dad's business partners. I heard them talking about him when they thought I was asleep." Lucas clicked to the next photo, which showed the same man getting into a car with license plates I didn't recognize. I wrote down his license plate number and looked it up online. The car is registered to a company that doesn't exist anymore. I stared at my son in amazement. "Lucas, how did you know to do that?" "I watch a lot of detective shows," he said with a shrug, "and I read mystery books. Plus, there are websites that teach you how to investigate people if you think they're doing something wrong." The next folder contained audio recordings, dozens of them with dates and times carefully noted. Lucas had apparently been hiding a small recording device. "I bought it with my allowance money on Amazon," he explained, in various locations around Benjamin's house during his custody visits. "Listen to this one," Lucas said, clicking on a file dated 3 weeks earlier. "This is Dad and Natasha talking in his office when they thought I was watching TV." Benjamin's voice came through the laptop speakers, clear and unmistakable. "The Peterson account should be enough to cover what we took from the Morrison deal. As long as the audit doesn't happen until after the first of the year, we'll be fine." Natasha's voice followed. "What if someone figures it out before then? What if Elena's lawyer starts digging into the business finances?" "Elena's lawyer is an idiot who can barely afford office rent," Benjamin replied with a laugh that made my stomach turn. "And even if he did start looking, I've moved everything offshore. The accounts in the Cayman Islands are completely untraceable." I felt like I couldn't breathe. "Lucas, do you understand what this means?" "It means Dad is stealing money from his clients and hiding it so you can't get any of it in the divorce," Lucas said simply, "and it means Natasha is helping him do it." The recordings got worse from there. Benjamin and Natasha discussing how to hide assets, how to make me look unstable during the custody evaluation, how to ensure that I ended up with nothing while they lived happily ever after on money that belonged to other people. "Here's the one where they talk about Dr. Walsh," Lucas said, opening another audio file. "The custody evaluator is taken care of," came Margaret Martinez's voice through the speakers. "I had lunch with her last week and explained the situation. She understands that Elena is having a breakdown and that Lucas needs stability." "You paid her off?" Natasha's voice sounded surprised. "I made a generous donation to her favorite charity," Margaret replied smoothly. "Sometimes that's all it takes to help people see the truth clearly." I sank back in my chair, overwhelmed by the scope of the conspiracy against me. It wasn't just Benjamin cheating and wanting a divorce, it was a coordinated effort to destroy me completely and steal money from innocent people in the process. "There's more," Lucas said quietly. "This is the worst one." He opened a video file, and I watched in horror as Benjamin and Natasha sat in what looked like a hotel room, counting stacks of cash and laughing about something. "The best part," Benjamin was saying to the camera, "is that by the time anyone figures out what happened to their money, Elena will be the one they blame. The crazy ex-wife who had access to all the accounts and probably stole everything during her mental breakdown." "You're evil," Natasha said, but she was laughing as she said it. "I love it." "They're planning to frame you," Lucas said, his young voice heavy with understanding that no child should have to carry. "They're going to steal all this money and then make it look like you did it." I looked at my son, this brave little boy who had risked everything to uncover the truth while the adults around him were busy destroying each other. "Lucas, why didn't you tell me about this sooner?" "Because I wanted to make sure I had enough evidence," he said seriously. "And because I was scared they might hurt you if they found out I knew." "Hurt me how?" "They talk about you like you're not a real person," Lucas said, his eyes filling with tears for the first time since he'd started showing me the evidence. "Like you're just something in their way that they need to get rid of. And Mom, I think they're going to try to have you arrested for stealing the money they actually stole." The pieces were falling into place now, the full scope of Benjamin's plan becoming clear. He wasn't just leaving me for another woman, he was systematically destroying my life while building a new one for himself on stolen money. And when the theft was eventually discovered, I would be the perfect scapegoat, the bitter ex-wife with access to the accounts and a documented history of mental instability. "We have to take this to the police," I said. "No," Lucas said firmly, "we have to take it to the judge. Tomorrow, at the hearing, that's when everyone will be there, and they won't be able to run away or destroy the evidence." I looked at my 9-year-old son. This little detective who had single-handedly uncovered a conspiracy that could have destroyed both our lives, and felt a surge of pride mixed with heartbreak. He shouldn't have had to do this. He shouldn't have had to protect me when I was supposed to be protecting him. But he had done it anyway, and now we finally had the weapon we needed to fight back. "Are you ready to be the bravest kid in the world tomorrow?" I asked him. Lucas smiled, and for the first time in months, it reached his eyes. "I've been ready for weeks, Mom. I've just been waiting for the right moment." The right moment was finally here. The morning of the final hearing, I woke up feeling like I was preparing for my own execution. My hands shook as I put on the same navy suit I'd worn to every court appearance, the one that had become my uniform of defeat. But today felt different. Today, Lucas and I had a secret weapon that no one else knew about. "You ready for this, sweetheart?" I asked Lucas as we walked up the courthouse steps. He clutched his small backpack tightly, the blue flash drive hidden safely inside, along with his laptop as backup. "I'm ready, Mom," he said, his voice steady and determined. "Are you?" I squeezed his hand. "I'm ready." But as we entered courtroom 3B, my confidence began to crumble. The room was packed with Benjamin's supporters, all dressed in their finest clothes, like they were attending a celebration rather than a divorce hearing. Margaret Martinez sat in the front row, wearing a satisfied smile and a pearl necklace that probably cost more than my rent. Natasha was there too, stunning in a red dress and wearing my perfume like a victory banner. Benjamin looked confident and relaxed at his table, occasionally turning to smile at his cheering section. Patricia Hawthorne shuffled through papers with the air of someone who had already won. Even the court reporter seemed to be on their side, nodding politely when Margaret Martinez made some comment about finally getting this mess resolved. Thomas Henderson, my budget lawyer, looked nervous and unprepared as usual. He'd barely glanced at the settlement papers and had already advised me twice to just accept the offer and move on with your life. "All rise for the Honorable Judge Patricia Reynolds," the bailiff announced. Judge Reynolds entered with her usual stern expression, her gray hair pulled back severely and her reading glasses already perched on her nose. She took her seat behind the massive wooden desk and surveyed the packed courtroom with obvious distaste. "This is the final hearing in the matter of Martinez versus Martinez," she began. "I've reviewed all the documentation, the custody evaluation, and the financial disclosures. Unless there are any last-minute developments, I'm prepared to rule on the settlement as proposed." Patricia Hawthorne stood immediately. "Your Honor, my client is eager to finalize this matter and move forward with his life. The settlement is more than generous, and we believe it's in everyone's best interest to conclude these proceedings today." I felt the walls closing in around me. This was it. The moment where I would lose everything and Benjamin would walk away with his stolen money and his new life. I looked back at Lucas, who gave me an encouraging nod. "Mrs. Martinez," Judge Reynolds said, "do you have anything to add before I make my ruling?" I started to stand, to accept the pathetic settlement that would leave me with almost nothing, when the laughter started behind me. Soft at first, then growing louder as Benjamin's supporters began to whisper among themselves about my obvious defeat. "Look at her," someone said, not bothering to lower their voice. "She knows she's beaten." Finally, Margaret Martinez announced loudly, "We can put this whole unpleasant business behind us. Elena Martinez is finished." The word "finished" echoed through the courtroom like a death sentence. I felt the familiar tightness in my chest, the beginning of another panic attack that would only prove their point about my mental instability. I was about to sit back down and accept my fate when I felt a small hand slip into mine. Lucas had stood up beside me, his young face set with determination that reminded me of my own father when he'd made up his mind about something important. Without a word, he walked toward the judge's bench, his sneakers squeaking softly on the polished floor. The entire courtroom fell silent, watching this small boy approach the most powerful person in the room with the confidence of someone who knew exactly what he was doing. "Excuse me, Your Honor," Lucas said clearly, his voice carrying across the silent courtroom. Judge Reynolds looked surprised but not annoyed. "Yes, young man?" Lucas reached into his backpack and pulled out the blue flash drive, holding it up like a piece of evidence in a murder trial. "I think you really need to see this before you make your decision." The change in the courtroom atmosphere was immediate. Benjamin was half standing at his table, his face pale and confused. Margaret Martinez looked like she'd swallowed something bitter. Even Natasha had stopped her subtle preening to stare at my son with obvious alarm. "What is this, son?" Judge Reynolds asked, taking the flash drive from Lucas's small hand. Lucas leaned closer to the bench and whispered something in her ear that I couldn't hear. I watched the judge's eyebrows rise slowly as she listened, her expression shifting from mild curiosity to sharp attention, and then to something that looked almost like satisfaction. She looked at Lucas for a long moment, then at the flash drive, then directly at Benjamin's table where the confident smiles were rapidly fading into expressions of panic. "I think we need a brief recess," Judge Reynolds announced, inserting the flash drive into her computer. "Bailiff, please ensure that no one leaves this courtroom. For the next 20 minutes, the only sounds in courtroom 3B were the soft clicks of Judge Reynolds' mouse and the increasingly nervous whispers from Benjamin's side of the room. I watched Benjamin's face grow paler with each passing minute, watched Patricia Hawthorne frantically shuffling through papers as if looking for some legal loophole that could save them. Finally, Judge Reynolds looked up from her computer screen. Her eyes swept across the courtroom, taking in Benjamin's terrified expression, Margaret's confused frown, and Natasha's obvious panic. When her gaze landed on me, I saw something I hadn't dared to hope for: justice. Judge Reynolds smiled then, just slightly, but it was the most beautiful smile I'd ever seen. She looked directly at Benjamin and his high-powered legal team, and her voice carried a note of satisfaction that made my heart soar. "Well," she said, her words falling into the absolute silence like stones into still water, "let's just say the truth has finally arrived." She picked up her gavel, and I knew that everything was about to change. "Mr. Martinez, you're under arrest."